The entire airline cabin froze as Demetrius Washington, tech billionaire and CEO of Neurotech, stood up. "This aircraft isn't moving until my daughter gets proper accommodation," he announced calmly. The flight attendant who had just denied Jasmine's medical request paled, suddenly recognizing the man whose company owned half the airline stock. Before we dive into this incredible story, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments. And if you believe in standing up against discrimination, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that will change how you see the world. Jasmine Washington woke up at exactly 6:15 a.m. every morning. Not because she wanted to, what 17-year-old would, but because her type 1 diabetes demanded a strict schedule. First thing, check blood glucose levels. The familiar beep of her monitor showed 112 milligrams per deciliter. Perfect. She carefully measured her insulin dose, administered it through her pump, and prepared for another day at Westridge Academy. Despite the scholarship that covered her tuition at the prestigious private school, Jasmine never quite felt like she belonged. The campus with its manicured lawns and colonial architecture housed predominantly white students from wealthy families. As one of only 27 black students in a school of 800, Jasmine had grown accustomed to the subtle racism that permeated her daily experience. "Good morning, Tiffany," Mrs. Caldwell, her calculus teacher, greeted her as she entered the classroom. "It's Jasmine, Mrs. Caldwell," she corrected gently. This was the third time this month. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Jasmine. You and Tiffany just look so similar." Jasmine forced a smile. Tiffany Jackson was also black, but a full 6 inches shorter with braids rather than Jasmine's natural curls. Their only similarity was their skin color, but Jasmine had learned to save her energy for battles that mattered. During lunch, she discreetly checked her blood sugar again. The cafeteria's offerings rarely accommodated her dietary needs, so she brought carefully prepared meals from home. As she calculated carbohydrates and adjusted her insulin pump, she noticed Bradley Cooper, a lacrosse player, watching her from the next table. "Is that like a drug thing?" he asked, gesturing to her medical equipment. "No, it's a stay-alive thing," Jasmine replied evenly. "Type 1 diabetes." "Oh." His interest faded. "Did you eat too much sugar as a kid or something?" Jasmine had heard this question so many times she had a rehearsed answer. "Actually, type 1 is an autoimmune condition. Has nothing to do with diet or lifestyle." Bradley shrugged and returned to his friends, uninterested in the medical reality that shaped her entire existence. Her best friend Zoe Thompson slid into the seat across from her. Zoe, with her mixed black and Korean heritage, understood parts of Jasmine's experience but not all of it. "Bradley giving you grief about your pump again?" Zoe asked, unwrapping her sandwich. "Just the usual ignorance," Jasmine sighed. "Nothing new. You should report him for harassment." Jasmine shook her head. "And be labeled the difficult black girl?" "No thanks." After school, while other students headed to extracurriculars, Jasmine reviewed her glucose readings from the day. Despite the social challenges, she maintained straight A's in all advanced placement classes. She had to. Her dream of studying biomedical engineering at MIT wouldn't materialize without academic excellence, especially as a black student who couldn't rely on family connections. The memory of her diagnosis at age 8 still felt fresh. The hospital stays, the frightening blood sugar crashes, the sudden need to calculate every morsel of food. Her father, Demetrius Washington, had sat beside her hospital bed, holding her small hand in his large one. "This isn't fair," she had cried after the doctors explained her lifelong condition. "No, it's not," Demetrius had agreed, not sugarcoating the truth. "Life will give you extra challenges, Jasmine. Being black in America is already one. Being a black woman will be another. And now this. But you come from strong stock. Your great-grandmother cleaned houses after her husband was lynched, put 3 children through college. Your grandmother marched with Dr. King and got water hosed for it. I grew up with gunshots as lullabies on Chicago's South Side and still built a tech empire. This diabetes? It's just another hurdle you'll clear. That was before Nuratech had made her father a billionaire. Before their move from their modest Chicago apartment to a mansion in Connecticut. Back when Demetrius still drove a used Honda instead of being chauffeured in a Bentley. But some things hadn't changed. Every Sunday, without fail, Demetrius took Jasmine to museums or science exhibitions. In his home laboratory, they conducted experiments together, her father nurturing her scientific curiosity even as he ran a corporation revolutionizing neural interface technology. Her mother, Dr. Alicia Washington, brought a different strength. As one of few black female neurosurgeons in the country, she taught Jasmine how to advocate for herself in medical settings where black women were often ignored or disbelieved. Document everything, Alicia would say. Know your numbers better than the doctors do. Never let anyone dismiss your symptoms. Tonight, Jasmine reviewed her MIT interview preparation materials. Tomorrow's flight to Boston represented more than a college interview. It was the first step toward her dream of developing better diabetes management technology for underserved communities. Communities where people like her pre-wealth father couldn't afford the sophisticated equipment that kept her alive. She double-checked her presentation on novel glucose monitoring applications, her research on pancreatic cell regeneration, and her essay about growing up with diabetes as a young black woman. Then she carefully packed her medical supplies for the trip, methodically counting backup pump equipment, test strips, glucose tablets, and insulin vials. Tomorrow would change everything. She just didn't know how true that would be. The morning of the Boston flight arrived with the familiar beep of Jasmine's glucose monitor. 5:30 a.m. Earlier than usual, but air travel required extra preparation when managing type 1 diabetes. She carefully reviewed her checklist for the third time. 2 weeks worth of insulin, though the trip was only 3 days. Extra pump supplies and insertion sets. Backup syringes in case the pump failed. Blood testing supplies. Glucose tablets and fast-acting carbohydrate snacks. Medical ID and physician documentation. Cooling packs for insulin. Everything needed to be carried on, checking diabetes supplies was never an option. Temperature-sensitive insulin could be destroyed in cargo holds, and luggage could be lost. For someone with type 1 diabetes, missing supplies weren't merely an inconvenience, they could be fatal. Demetrius knocked on her bedroom door. All set, Jazz? I think so, Jasmine said, zipping her medical supply bag. Just nervous about traveling alone. Her father sat on the edge of her bed. Your mother would be coming with you if that emergency surgery hadn't come up. And I'll be on a later flight once my investor meeting wraps up. You'll only be alone for a few hours. It's not that, Jasmine admitted. It's dealing with airport security and flight attendants who don't understand diabetes. Remember last year when that TSA agent thought my insulin was a prohibited liquid and almost confiscated it? Demetrius's expression darkened. I remember. But you handled it perfectly. You stayed calm, asked for a supervisor, and showed your documentation. I was still detained for 45 minutes while my blood sugar dropped. Which is why we always arrive early. He squeezed her shoulder. Jazz, you know how to advocate for yourself. You've been doing it since elementary school. Jasmine nodded, remembering an incident from 4th grade. Her teacher had refused to let her eat a necessary snack during class when her continuous glucose monitor alarmed. Her mother had responded with diplomatic emails and meetings. Her father had gone straight to the school board with a lawyer. 2 different approaches that achieved the same result, a formal diabetes management plan that protected Jasmine's rights. Sometimes I wish I could handle things like Mom does, Jasmine confessed. She's so graceful about it all. Demetrius smiled. Your mother spent years perfecting that professional calm. But remember what she told you about the early days of her residency? Jasmine nodded. That she documented every microaggression and built alliances until she had enough power to change the department culture. Exactly. Different situations call for different approaches. Sometimes you need Mom's quiet persistence. Sometimes you need my direct confrontation. But you always need to stand up for yourself, because if I don't, no one else will, Jasmine finished. They rode to the airport in comfortable silence, Demetrius occasionally checking his phone for business updates. Neurotech was finalizing a groundbreaking neural implant that could revolutionize treatment for Parkinson's disease, and the emergency investor meeting couldn't be rescheduled. "I'll be on the 2 p.m. flight," he promised as they pulled up to the departures terminal. "I'll meet you at the hotel before dinner. Text me when you land." The trouble started at security. Despite Jasmine's medical documentation clearly stating she needed to travel with liquid medications and medical devices, the TSA agent eyed her insulin vials suspiciously. "This is over the 3-ounce limit," he stated flatly. "Medical liquids are exempt," Jasmine explained calmly. "I have documentation right here." The agent barely glanced at her physician's letter. "And what's this?" he asked, pointing to her insulin pump. "It's an insulin pump. It's attached to my body and can't go through the scanner. You'll need a pat-down." "I know. I'm requesting a female agent and a private screening." The agent sighed as if her medical needs were an inconvenience designed specifically to complicate his morning. "Wait over there." Jasmine waited. And waited. 15 minutes passed before a female agent appeared, looking irritated at the assignment. The pat-down was rougher than necessary, the agent's questions tinged with suspicion rather than understanding. "Are you sure this can't be disconnected?" she asked, pointing to the insulin pump tubing that disappeared beneath Jasmine's clothing. "Not without risking my health," Jasmine explained for the 3rd time. "It's delivering medication continuously." The agent's skepticism was palpable. "Well, I need to swab it for explosives." By the time Jasmine was cleared, her blood sugar had dropped from the stress and delayed breakfast. She quickly ate a protein bar while texting updates to her parents. "Jasmine, made it through security finally. They were difficult about my supplies again." "Mom, are you okay? Do you need me to call someone?" "Jasmine, I'm fine. Just frustrated." "Dad, want me to make some calls?" "I know the TSA director." "Jasmine, no need for the nuclear option, Dad. Heading to gate now." She smiled at her father's readiness to deploy his considerable influence. Since Neurotech had made him a billionaire, doors opened that had previously been firmly closed to a black man from Chicago's South Side. Demetrius used that power judiciously but unhesitatingly when it came to protecting his family. Boarding would begin soon. Jasmine checked her blood sugar again, still running a bit low from the security ordeal. She unwrapped a small sandwich, knowing she needed to stabilize before the flight. Little did she know this simple act would trigger the most publicized confrontation of her life. Jasmine settled into seat 14A, a window spot in the Comfort Plus section of the Delta flight to Boston. The early morning security ordeal had left her exhausted, and her continuous glucose monitor showed her blood sugar trending downward, an urgent warning sign that she needed to eat something before takeoff. She reached into her bag for a peanut butter sandwich, specially prepared with precisely calculated carbohydrates. As she unwrapped it, a shadow fell across her tray table. "Excuse me." The voice was sharp, professionally polite but with an unmistakable edge. "You'll need to put that away until after takeoff." Jasmine looked up to see Flight Attendant Heather Wilson, a blonde woman in her mid-40s with an impeccably pressed uniform and a name tag displaying 30 years of service. "I'm sorry, but I need to eat this now," Jasmine explained. "I have type 1 diabetes, and my blood sugar is dropping." Heather's lips tightened. "I understand you think that's necessary, but FAA regulations require all passengers to stow food items during takeoff and landing." The emphasis on "you think" wasn't lost on Jasmine. She'd encountered this before, the assumption that she was exaggerating her medical needs or seeking special treatment. "It's not what I think, it's a medical necessity," Jasmine replied, keeping her voice level. She lifted her wrist to show her medical alert bracelet. "I can show you my doctor's documentation if needed." Heather's eyes narrowed. "That won't be necessary. Rules apply to everyone, medical condition or not. You'll need to wait just like everybody else." Jasmine noticed the businessman in 14C opening a protein bar without comment from the flight attendant. He caught her glance and quickly looked away, unwilling to get involved. The contrast was stark, a middle-aged white man eating without interference while she, a young black woman with a documented medical condition, was being reprimanded. "Excuse me," Jasmine said, her voice slightly louder but still polite, "but this is actually medical discrimination. Federal Air Carrier Access Act regulations specifically state that airlines must accommodate passengers with diabetes who need to eat to maintain blood glucose levels." Several nearby passengers glanced over. Someone a few rows back had their phone out, the camera possibly recording. Heather's face flushed. "Do not raise your voice at me, young lady," she said. "I'm not discriminating against anyone. I'm enforcing safety regulations." "Then why is that man allowed to eat?" Jasmine gestured toward 14C, whose protein bar was now half consumed. Heather didn't even look. "I'm not going to argue with you. If you're going to play the race card and be disruptive, we'll need to consider whether you should remain on this flight." The phrase, race card, hit Jasmine like a physical blow. She hadn't mentioned race, Heather had made that leap herself, revealing her own assumptions. Meanwhile, Jasmine could feel the telltale symptoms of hypoglycemia beginning, the slight tremor in her hands, the cold sweat forming on her forehead, the increasing difficulty in organizing her thoughts. "I'm not being disruptive," Jasmine said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I'm trying to prevent a medical emergency. My blood sugar is dropping right now." She held up her continuous glucose monitor, showing the downward trend and the current reading of 65 mg per deciliter, already below normal range and falling rapidly. Heather barely glanced at the device. "If you have a real medical emergency, we have protocols for that after takeoff. For now, put the food away." The trembling in Jasmine's hands worsened as she fumbled with her phone, trying to text her parents. The screen blurred before her eyes, another symptom of dangerously low blood sugar. "Jasmine, having problem with flight attendant. Won't let me eat. BS dropen." The garbled text reflected her deteriorating condition. She needed glucose immediately. "I need to speak to another flight attendant," Jasmine managed to say, her words slightly slurred. "You need to comply with crew member instructions," Heather responded, mistaking Jasmine's medical symptoms for defiance. "I'm going to have to ask you to move to the back of the aircraft where we can monitor your disruptive behavior." The irony wasn't lost on Jasmine even in her compromised state, a black person being told to move to the back. History repeating itself in modern form. A woman across the aisle spoke up. "She doesn't look well. I think she really needs to eat something." "Are you a medical professional?" Heather asked sharply. "No, but..." "Then please stay out of this." Jasmine's CGM alarm beeped loudly, an urgent warning that her glucose had fallen below 55 mg per deciliter. Emergency territory. With trembling hands, she reached for her glucose tablets, dropping the container. Colorful tablets scattered across the floor. "Now look at the mess you've made," Heather said, exasperation clear in her voice. "This is exactly why we have these rules." Through the gathering fog in her mind, Jasmine could see phones recording now, passengers murmuring, the situation escalating beyond her control. All she had wanted was to eat a sandwich to prevent exactly this medical crisis that was now unfolding at 30,000 feet. And somewhere over the Atlantic, her father was receiving her garbled text message, completely unaware of how dramatically he was about to enter this story. Jasmine's vision blurred as she bent to retrieve the scattered glucose tablets. The simple movement sent a wave of dizziness through her body, and she gripped the seat to steady herself. "Please," she whispered, the word slurring slightly. "I'm having a hypoglycemic episode." Heather Wilson stood with arms crossed, interpreting Jasmine's medical distress as theatrical defiance. "If you're feeling unwell, all the more reason to follow instructions and wait until we're at cruising altitude." A tall black man in a flight attendant uniform approached from the front of the cabin. His name tag read Raymond Peterson, Senior Flight Attendant. "What's happening here?" he asked, taking in the scene with a quick glance. "Passenger refusing to comply with pre-takeoff procedures," Heather reported briskly. "Claims she needs to eat for medical reasons." Raymond looked at Jasmine, noting her pallor, trembling hands, and the medical alert bracelet on her wrist. Recognition flashed in his eyes. "Are you having a low blood sugar episode?" he asked directly. Jasmine nodded, relief washing over her as someone finally understood. "I need orange juice," she managed to say. "And my glucose tablets." Without hesitation, Raymond turned to Heather. "Get orange juice from the galley. Now, please." "We haven't completed the pre-departure checklist," Heather protested. "FAA regulations clearly state. Medical emergencies supersede standard procedure," Raymond cut in firmly. "Orange juice. Now." As Heather reluctantly headed toward the galley, Raymond knelt beside Jasmine's seat and helped gather the remaining glucose tablets. "My sister has type 1, he explained quietly. "I recognize the signs." "How low are you?" 52 and dropping, Jasmine whispered, showing him her monitor. Raymond nodded gravely. "Hang in there. We'll get your sugar up." Heather returned with a small plastic cup of orange juice, her expression tight with disapproval. "This is highly irregular." Jasmine drank the juice in desperate gulps while Raymond opened a package of cookies from his own bag. "Eat these too," he instructed. "The fast-acting sugar from the juice will help immediately, but you need complex carbs to stabilize." The cabin had gone unusually quiet, passengers watching the drama unfold. Several still had phones recording the incident. Jasmine could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her as she ate the cookies with shaking hands. As the glucose began entering her bloodstream, the fog in her mind started to clear. The relief of avoiding a full-blown medical emergency was overshadowed by the humiliation of the public spectacle. Heather remained standing nearby, her posture stiff. "This kind of special treatment disrupts our entire boarding process," she muttered, just loud enough for those in nearby seats to hear. Raymond's expression hardened. "This isn't special treatment, Heather. It's standard medical accommodation." "She should have planned better," Heather insisted. "If her condition is so severe, perhaps she shouldn't be traveling alone." A middle-aged woman in seat 15B spoke up. "My son has type 1. Low blood sugar can happen unexpectedly even with perfect management. It's not something you can always plan for." Others began to voice support. "I saw her show her medical bracelet. She was trying to eat before it became an emergency. Why was that guy allowed to eat his protein bar without any problem?" Jasmine's CGM showed her levels rising, 60 mg per deciliter now and climbing slowly. The immediate danger was passing, but emotionally, she felt devastated. Tears welled in her eyes despite her best efforts to maintain composure. She thought of her father's words about standing up for herself, about not letting anyone's ignorance or prejudice limit her life. But in this moment, strapped into a seat on a plane full of strangers, her medical condition exposed for all to see, she felt powerless. Raymond checked her monitor again. "You're coming up, but still too low. Keep eating." Heather interjected, "Once you're stabilized, we'll need to move you to a different seat. Your situation has disrupted the cabin." "That's unnecessary," Raymond countered. "It's protocol for disruptive passengers," Heather insisted. "She's not disruptive. She had a medical emergency that we're required by law to accommodate." Their argument continued as Jasmine tried to make herself smaller in her seat. Her blood sugar was rising, but her spirit felt crushed. With slightly steadier hands, she reached for her phone to update her parents. Jasmine had hypo on plane. Being treated now. Flight attendant hostile. Trying to move my seat. The text sent just as the announcement came to prepare for takeoff. Raymond assured her he would check on her after they reached cruising altitude, while Heather maintained that Jasmine would need to be relocated for monitoring. As the plane began taxiing, Jasmine looked out the window, wiping away silent tears. She didn't see the commotion at the gate she had just left, where Demetrius Washington had arrived after canceling his later flight, his face set in determination as he showed his ID to the gate agent and demanded to board. What do you think about how Jasmine was treated? Do you believe Heather was following proper protocol or discriminating against Jasmine? Comment number 1 if you think Heather was in the wrong, or number 2 if you believe she was just doing her job. If you've ever experienced or witnessed medical discrimination, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories that expose these important issues. How do you think Jasmine's father will respond when he discovers what happened to his daughter? The next part of this story will absolutely blow your mind. The cabin crew had just completed their final pre-takeoff check when a commotion erupted at the aircraft door. Passengers craned their necks to see what was causing the delay. Jasmine, still recovering from her hypoglycemic episode, remained focused on her continuous glucose monitor, now reading 72 mg per deciliter, better, but not yet normal. A tall, powerfully built black man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit appeared in the doorway. At 53, Demetrius Washington carried himself with the unmistakable confidence of someone accustomed to commanding rooms. His closely cropped salt and pepper hair and designer glasses gave him the appearance of an academic rather than a tech mogul, but the aura of authority was unmistakable. "Sir, you cannot board. The door has been closed for departure," a flustered gate agent called from behind him. Demetrius ignored her, scanning the cabin until his eyes locked on Jasmine in row 14. He strode purposefully down the aisle. "Dad?" Jasmine's voice was small with surprise and relief. "Are you okay?" Demetrius asked, kneeling beside her seat, his focus entirely on his daughter despite the chaos his arrival had caused. "I'm better now," she whispered. "My sugar dropped really low. They wouldn't let me eat." A muscle tightened in Demetrius's jaw. "Who wouldn't?" Before Jasmine could answer, Heather Wilson approached, her professional demeanor strained but intact. "Sir, you need to deplane immediately. You're delaying an entire aircraft and violating federal regulations." Demetrius rose to his full height, turning slowly to face the flight attendant. "Are you Heather Wilson?" Her eyes widened slightly at being addressed by name. "Yes, and I must insist you. You're the flight attendant who refused to allow my daughter to treat her medical condition." His voice was calm but carried easily through the now silent cabin. "Sir, I followed standard protocol for. My daughter informed you she has type 1 diabetes and was experiencing hypoglycemia. She showed you her medical alert bracelet. She explained that she needed to eat immediately to prevent a medical emergency. And you refused her accommodation that is guaranteed under the Air Carrier Access Act." Heather's posture stiffened. "Sir, we have procedures that must be followed during critical phases of flight. Your daughter became argumentative and disruptive when asked to comply with safety regulations." "Argumentative?" Demetrius echoed. "My daughter's blood glucose was below 60 mg per deciliter. That affects cognitive function. She was experiencing a potentially life-threatening medical emergency, not being argumentative. I understand you're concerned as a parent, but... Do you know who I am?" Demetrius asked quietly. "That's not relevant to. My name is Demetrius Washington. I'm the founder and CEO of Nuratech." The recognition didn't register immediately on Heather's face. "Nuratech holds a 30% stake in Aurora Capital Group," Demetrius continued, "which, as you may be aware, is the majority shareholder of this airline." Heather's face drained of color as the implications sank in. Whispers rippled through the cabin as passengers processed this revelation. Phones recorded the confrontation from multiple angles. Demetrius reached into his pocket and retrieved his phone. "I'm calling Gerald Thornton right now." The CEO?" Heather stammered. "We play golf on Sundays," Demetrius confirmed, dialing with one hand while keeping his other hand protectively on Jasmine's shoulder. As a teenager, Demetrius had faced similar discrimination, though under very different circumstances. Growing up in Chicago's South Side, he'd been followed through stores, stopped by police for simply walking in certain neighborhoods, and questioned about his presence in academic competitions. Back then, he'd had no power, no influence, no recourse but to swallow his anger and dignity to survive. He had promised himself that his daughter would never face injustice without protection. That promise had fueled 18-hour workdays coding in a rented garage, years of rejected investor pitches, and finally, the breakthrough neural interface technology that had made Neuratech a billion-dollar company. "Gerald? Demetrius Washington. I'm currently on Flight 1372 to Boston where a flight attendant named Heather Wilson refused critical medical accommodation to my diabetic daughter, causing her to experience a severe hypoglycemic episode." "Yes. Yes, she's recovering now, thankfully." Another flight attendant named Raymond Peterson eventually intervened. "I'd like this addressed immediately." Throughout the call, Heather's expression cycled through shock, disbelief, and dawning horror. Other crew members had gathered at the commotion, including Raymond Peterson and the captain himself, a man in his 60s with 4 stripes on his uniform shoulders. "Mr. Washington," the captain said as Demetrius ended his call. "I'm Captain Reynolds. I was just informed of the situation. Please accept my sincere apologies for what your daughter experienced." "Captain," Demetrius acknowledged with a slight nod. "My issue isn't with your airline's policies, which I know explicitly accommodate passengers with diabetes. My issue is with the discriminatory application of those policies by this particular employee." The cabin supervisor, a woman named Barbara Chin, stepped forward. "Mr. Washington, we take this matter extremely seriously. Ms. Wilson will be removed from this flight immediately, and will ensure your daughter receives proper accommodation." "That won't be necessary," Demetrius replied, surprising everyone. "Sir?" Barbara looked confused. "I don't want special treatment for my daughter because I'm a major shareholder. I want equal treatment for all passengers with medical conditions, regardless of who they are or what they look like." Heather, who had been standing frozen in humiliation, finally spoke. "Mr. Washington, I assure you I had no idea who you were. This wasn't about race." "Then why," Demetrius asked pointedly, "was the white businessman in 14C allowed to eat his protein bar without comment while my daughter was denied the same right despite her medical documentation?" Heather had no answer. Demetrius turned to address the entire cabin, his voice carrying clearly down the aisle. "What happened to my daughter today happens to people of color with chronic illnesses every day. They're disbelieved. Their pain is minimized. Their medical needs are questioned. The difference is that most of them don't have a father who can call the CEO." Phones throughout the cabin captured his words. Social media was already lighting up with videos of the confrontation. "Today, my daughter was fortunate. I had the means and influence to intervene. But medical discrimination kills people who lack that privilege. It's not about me or my daughter anymore. It's about fixing a system that forces people to depend on privilege for fair treatment." Captain Reynolds cleared his throat. "Mr. Washington, what would you like us to do at this point?" Demetrius looked at Jasmine, whose glucose levels had finally stabilized at 95 milligrams per deciliter. "That's up to my daughter. She's the one who was harmed." All eyes turned to Jasmine. Despite the lingering fatigue from her hypoglycemic episode, she sat up straighter. In that moment, she wasn't just Demetrius Washington's daughter or a diabetic patient or a black teenager. She was a young woman finding her voice. "I want to continue to Boston for my MIT interview," she said clearly. And I want Ms. Wilson to remain on this flight. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the cabin. Are you sure? Demetrius asked quietly. Jasmine nodded. Removing her solves nothing. It just hides the problem. I want her to see me as a human being, not just a disruption or a policy violation. That's the only way anything changes. Pride shone in Demetrius's eyes. His daughter had found her own approach, neither his confrontational style nor her mother's quiet diplomacy, but something uniquely her own. I'll be staying on this flight as well, Demetrius announced to the captain. If there's an available seat. Within minutes, a first-class passenger had volunteered to switch seats with Demetrius, eager to accommodate the tech billionaire who now sat beside his daughter in row 14. As the plane finally pushed back from the gate, nearly 40 minutes behind schedule, the cabin buzzed with whispered conversations and furious social media posting. Jasmine leaned her head against her father's shoulder. I'm sorry you had to change your plans. Never apologize for needing support, Demetrius replied softly. That's what family is for. Besides, your mother would have my head if I didn't make sure you were okay. As the plane accelerated down the runway, Jasmine couldn't help but notice Heather Wilson's stiff movements as she performed the safety demonstration, aware that dozens of phones were documenting her every expression. The power dynamic had shifted dramatically, but Jasmine took no pleasure in the flight attendant's discomfort. This wasn't about punishment. It was about accountability, something her parents had taught her was necessary for real change. And as the plane lifted into the clouds, Jasmine knew that whatever happened next would extend far beyond this flight. The seatbelt sign had barely turned off when Gerald Thornton, CEO of Aurora Airlines, called Demetrius back. The entire first-class cabin could hear Demetrius's side of the conversation as he declined offers of private jets, luxury accommodations, and personal apologies from the airline's executive team. Gerald, I appreciate the gesture, but that's not why I called you, Demetrius explained patiently. This isn't about getting VIP treatment for my family. It's about ensuring your airline properly trains staff to handle medical accommodations for all passengers. Jasmine watched her father navigate the conversation with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to boardrooms and negotiation tables. This was the Demetrius Washington that the business world knew, strategic, measured, but uncompromising. I understand you're concerned about potential social media fallout, he continued. But offering me perks doesn't address the systemic issue. Yes, I'm aware videos are already circulating online. The cabin crew moved through the aisle with unnatural brightness, hyper-aware that their every interaction was being scrutinized by passengers still recording the unfolding drama. Raymond Peterson stopped at Jasmine's row. How are your glucose levels? He asked quietly. Jasmine checked her monitor. Steady at 110. Thank you for your help earlier. No need to thank me. It's literally my job. Raymond's eyes flicked toward Heather, who was deliberately working the opposite aisle. Some of us take the safety and comfort of all passengers part of our training seriously. The cabin supervisor, Barbara Chen, approached next, kneeling beside Demetrius as he ended his call. Mr. Washington, I can't express how deeply sorry we are for what happened. I've been with Aurora for 22 years, and this goes against everything in our training. Demetrius nodded. I appreciate that, Ms. Chen. But I'm curious, how often does your airline receive complaints about medical discrimination? Barbara hesitated. I don't have exact numbers. I'll tell you. Aurora Airlines received 67 formal complaints regarding medical accommodation denials last year alone. 43 came from passengers of color. Barbara's surprise was evident. I wasn't aware. Most corporations aren't aware of their own statistics until someone like me has their legal team analyze the data, Demetrius explained. That's part of the problem. The incidents are treated as isolated cases rather than a pattern requiring systemic change. From the front of the cabin, the captain's voice announced over the PA system, Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds. I've just been informed that we have a very special passenger with us today. Mr. Demetrius Washington, CEO of Neuratech and a significant investor in our parent company, is traveling with us. On behalf of Aurora Airlines, I want to personally apologize for the unfortunate incident during boarding and assure all our passengers that we take medical accommodations very seriously. Jasmine cringed at the announcement, which only drew more attention to their situation. She noticed several passengers Googling her father on their phones, eyes widening as they read about his $22 billion net worth and revolutionary neural interface technology. "Dad," she whispered, everyone's staring. "Let them," Demetrius replied calmly. "Sometimes visibility is necessary for change." The flight attendants huddled near the galley, casting nervous glances toward row 14. Even Heather's previously confident demeanor had crumbled under the weight of realization that she had denied medical accommodation to the daughter of one of the airline's largest shareholders, a man whose net worth exceeded the airline's entire market capitalization. Demetrius's phone buzzed with notifications. "The videos are gaining traction," he noted, scrolling through his media alerts. #diabetes while black is trending. A woman from across the aisle leaned over. "Mr. Washington, I just wanted to say thank you for speaking up. My mother has multiple sclerosis, and we've faced similar dismissal of her medical needs when traveling." An older man from 2 rows ahead turned around. "My grandson has type 1 diabetes. What happened to your daughter happens to him all the time, even though he's not black. It's like people think diabetics are just making excuses to break rules." One by one, passengers began sharing their own experiences with medical discrimination, invisible disabilities questioned, accommodation requests treated as inconveniences, medical equipment mishandled by untrained staff. Jasmine listened, struck by the realization that while race had amplified her experience, the fundamental issue of medical discrimination transcended racial boundaries. It affected anyone whose body didn't conform to arbitrary standards of normal. The captain emerged from the cockpit, making his way down the aisle to speak with Demetrius personally. "Mr. Washington, I want to extend my personal apologies. This is not how Aurora Airlines trains its crew to handle medical accommodations." "I appreciate that, Captain," Demetrius replied. "But I'm more interested in actions than apologies. What specific changes will Aurora implement to prevent this from happening to other passengers?" The question caught the captain off guard. "Well, I'm sure our corporate team will." "That's the problem," Demetrius interrupted gently. "Everyone assumes someone else will fix the system. The truth is, change requires intentional action at every level. From flight attendants to captains to CEOs." The conversation was interrupted by Heather's approach. Her earlier condescension had been replaced by visible anxiety. "Mr. Washington, Ms. Washington," she began stiffly. "I want to apologize for my handling of the situation. I clearly misinterpreted your medical needs and responded inappropriately." The apology, while technically correct, rang hollow. There was no acknowledgement of bias, no recognition of how race had influenced her perception of Jasmine's needs. It was the carefully worded statement of someone worried about job security, not a genuine recognition of harm caused. Jasmine met the flight attendant's eyes. "Ms. Wilson, I don't want your apology if it's only because you found out my father is rich and powerful. I want you to understand that every diabetic passenger deserves the accommodation you denied me, regardless of who their parents are." Heather's face flushed. "I assure you, this had nothing to do with race. I would have treated any passenger the same way." "That's the problem," Jasmine replied. "The policy isn't the issue. It's how discretion is applied differently depending on who's asking." Demetrius watched his daughter with quiet pride. She was handling the confrontation with a maturity beyond her 17 years, focusing on education rather than retribution. The remainder of the flight proceeded with meticulous attention to Jasmine's needs. Flight attendants offered regular drinks, checked on her glucose levels, and ensured she had everything required to manage her diabetes comfortably. The preferential treatment, so starkly different from the earlier discrimination, only highlighted the problematic nature of the system. As the plane began its descent into Boston, Demetrius received another call, this time from Aurora's VP of Public Relations, desperately trying to contain the social media firestorm that was erupting online. Videos of the confrontation had been viewed over 2 million times in the 3 hours since takeoff. "Yes, I understand your concern," Demetrius said into the phone. "But I think you're missing an opportunity here. Rather than trying to suppress the story, why not use it as a catalyst for meaningful change? Announce comprehensive medical accommodation training for all staff. Create clear, consistent protocols that don't rely on individual discretion. Position Aurora as leading the industry in accessibility." After ending the call, he turned to Jasmine. Their PR team is in panic mode. The video has gone viral. Jasmine checked her own phone to find dozens of messages from friends who had seen the videos. Even her MIT interviewer had sent an email expressing concern for her well-being and offering to reschedule if needed. As the plane touched down in Boston, neither Jasmine nor Demetrius could have anticipated the media frenzy waiting at the gate, or how their private confrontation was about to catalyze a national conversation about the intersection of race, disability, and privilege in America. While Flight 1372 was still crossing Pennsylvania airspace, the videos of Jasmine's confrontation with Heather had ignited a digital wildfire. By the time the wheels touched down at Boston Logan International Airport, #DiabetesWhileBlack was the #1 trending topic on Twitter, and clips of Demetrius Washington's impromptu speech about medical discrimination had been viewed over 5 million times. "Dad, look at this," Jasmine said, scrolling through her phone as they taxied to the gate. The hashtag had branched into related conversations, #ChronicIllnessWhileBlack, #Invisible Disability Discrimination, and #Medical Bias in America. Comments poured in from across the country. Watching that flight attendant's face when she realized who Demetrius Washington was equals priceless. This isn't just about race or diabetes. It's about how people with invisible disabilities are constantly forced to prove their needs are real. If it takes being a billionaire for a black person to get basic medical accommodation, what hope do the rest of us have? Most striking were the thousands of people sharing their own stories of medical discrimination while traveling, diabetes supplies confiscated, wheelchair users humiliated, seizure disorders dismissed as excuses for special treatment. "It's not just us," Jasmine whispered, overwhelmed by the cascade of similar experiences filling her screen. Demetrius nodded grimly. "It never is. One voice becomes permission for others to speak their truth." The cabin door opened, and immediately, the difference in treatment was apparent. Instead of the usual disembarkation process, a customer service representative boarded the plane. "Mr. Washington, Ms. Washington. I'm Taylor Montgomery, Customer Experience Director for Logan Airport. We'd like to escort you through a private exit to avoid the media gathered in the terminal." "Media?" Jasmine echoed, suddenly nervous. "Several news outlets have reporters waiting. Your story has generated significant interest." Demetrius turned to his daughter. "Your call, Jazz. We can take the private exit or face the cameras. Either way, I'm right beside you." Jasmine thought about all the people who had shared their stories online, people who never had the option of a private exit from their discrimination. "Let's go through the regular way," she decided. "But I don't want to give interviews yet. Not until I've had time to process everything." As they stepped into the jetway, Jasmine's phone buzzed with texts from Zoe. "Zoe, OMG Jazz. You're all over TikTok and Twitter. Are you okay? Call me." "Zoe, CNN just showed a clip of your dad going off on that flight attendant. Your mom must be freaking out." Jasmine quickly texted back, "I'm fine. Sugar stable now. We'll call when we get to hotel." Raymond Peterson, the flight attendant who had helped Jasmine during her hypoglycemic episode, approached as they prepared to enter the terminal. "Ms. Washington, I wanted to give you this." He handed her a business card. "I've been advocating for better medical emergency training for cabin crew for years. If you're willing, your experience could help change policies industry-wide." Thank you for helping my daughter when others wouldn't, Demetrius said, shaking Raymond's hand. No thanks needed, sir. But if you're serious about creating change at Aurora, I have documentation of 17 similar incidents in the past year alone. The system needs fixing, not just one flight attendant. As they emerged into the terminal, camera flashes erupted. Reporters called out questions while airport security created a path through the crowd. Jasmine kept her head down, but Demetrius maintained his characteristic composure, neither rushing nor engaging with the press. Inside a black SUV arranged by Neuroteca's Boston office, Jasmine finally exhaled. That was intense. Welcome to life in the public eye, Demetrius said with a wry smile. Not always fun, is it? No. Jasmine checked her continuous glucose monitor, 130 mg per deciliter, perfectly in range despite the stress. But maybe it's necessary sometimes. Her phone rang, her mother calling for the third time since landing. Mom, I'm okay, Jasmine said immediately upon answering. I've been watching the news, Dr. Alicia Washington's voice was calm but intense. Your father created quite a scene. He stood up for me when no one else would, Jasmine defended. I'm not criticizing him, sweetheart. I just want to make sure you're alright. Physically and emotionally. I'm fine now. My numbers are good. And how do you feel about becoming the face of a viral movement overnight? Jasmine hesitated. I don't know. I didn't ask for this. Few activists do, her mother replied softly. The question is what you'll do with the platform you've been given. After promising to call again before bed, Jasmine hung up and checked her email. The MIT Admissions Committee had sent another message. Dear Ms. Washington. We are aware of the incident that occurred during your travel to campus today. Please know that MIT stands firmly against all forms of discrimination, including medical discrimination. Your interview panel has been briefed on the situation and wants to assure you that this incident will in no way negatively impact your application. If you need to reschedule your interview due to today's events, we are happy to accommodate. Regards. Dr. Eleanor Chen. MIT Admissions Committee. Jasmine showed the email to her father. They already know. Of course they do, Demetrius replied. But don't worry, MIT isn't going to reject a brilliant young scientist because she stood up for her rights. At the Four Seasons Hotel, the manager personally escorted them to their suite, apologizing for the reporters gathered in the lobby. Inside the room, Jasmine finally allowed herself to process the emotional weight of the day, tears flowing freely as her father held her. I just wanted to go to my interview, she sobbed. I didn't want to become a hashtag. I know, Demetrius soothed. It's overwhelming. When she had calmed down, they ordered room service and watched the news coverage together. Most major networks were running the story, complete with expert panels discussing the intersection of race, disability, and privilege in healthcare access. One segment featured a statement from Aurora Airlines CEO, clearly crafted by crisis management specialists. Aurora Airlines deeply regrets the experience of Ms. Washington and is conducting a thorough investigation into the incident. We are committed to creating an inclusive environment for all passengers and will be implementing comprehensive reforms to our medical accommodation policies. Too little, too late, Demetrius commented. A breaking news alert appeared on the screen, developing. Sources reveal flight attendant Heather Wilson has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation into discriminatory conduct. Jasmine felt a complicated mix of vindication and guilt. I didn't want her to lose her job. She's not fired, just on leave during the investigation, Demetrius clarified. Actions have consequences, Jazz. That's how systems change. Later that evening, civil rights attorney Benjamin Crump called Demetrius, offering to represent Jasmine pro bono in any legal action against the airline. We're not pursuing litigation, Demetrius informed him after consulting with Jasmine. We're more interested in policy reform than financial compensation. Understand completely, Crump replied. But I'd like to mention this case in my upcoming congressional testimony on medical discrimination. It perfectly illustrates how these systems work, and how privilege determines outcomes. After the call, Jasmine curled up on the hotel sofa, scrolling through the still exploding social media conversation. Among the supportive messages were also troubling comments. Of course they apologized when daddy turned out to be a billionaire. Money talks. Another entitled rich kid using daddy's influence to get special treatment. If she was just a regular black girl without a famous father, she'd still be sitting in the back of that plane. The last comment hit hardest because Jasmine knew it was true. Her father's wealth and influence had protected her in ways unavailable to most people facing discrimination. Dad, she said quietly, some people think this is just about privilege. Demetrius sat beside her. In some ways, it is. I used my position to protect you when others couldn't protect themselves. The question is, what responsibility comes with that privilege? To help others who don't have the same protection, Jasmine answered immediately. Exactly. Demetrius smiled. Tomorrow, after your MIT interview, we'll figure out how to do that. Right now, you need to rest and prepare. As her father stepped onto the balcony to take another call, Jasmine drafted a social media post of her own, her first public statement about the incident. Today I experienced medical discrimination that could have resulted in a serious health emergency. I'm grateful my father was there to advocate for me, but aware that most people with invisible disabilities don't have billionaire parents to intervene. This isn't just about me or diabetes or race, it's about a system that requires privilege to access basic accommodations. I'm listening, learning, and committed to using this unexpected platform to push for meaningful change. #diabetes while black #invisible disability rights. She showed it to her father, who read it carefully before nodding his approval. Thoughtful, measured, and focused on the larger issue. Your mother would be proud. As she posted it, neither of them could have anticipated how this single statement would catalyze the next phase of what was rapidly evolving from a viral moment into a national movement. The sleek black SUV pulled up to MIT's Ray and Maria Stata Center, its distinctive architecture seeming to defy gravity, much like the past 24 hours of Jasmine's life. Camera crews positioned outside the building suggested that news of her interview schedule had leaked. Ready? Demetrius asked, squeezing his daughter's hand. Jasmine checked her continuous glucose monitor one last time, 112 milligrams per deciliter, perfectly steady. She had meticulously managed her diabetes since waking at 5 a.m., determined not to let yesterday's ordeal affect her MIT interview performance. As ready as I'll ever be, she replied, smoothing her navy blue blazer. As they stepped from the vehicle, reporters called out questions. Jasmine, how are you feeling after yesterday's incident? Mr. Washington, will you be suing Aurora Airlines? What do you think about Heather Wilson being placed on leave? Demetrius raised a hand. My daughter is here for a college interview, not a press conference. We appreciate your interest, but request privacy at this time. The MIT admissions director, Dr. Maya Kapoor, met them at a side entrance. Ms. Washington, Mr. Washington, welcome to MIT. We've arranged a secure route to the interview rooms. Thank you for the accommodation, Jasmine said, following Dr. Kapoor through a service corridor. No thanks necessary. We believe in evaluating candidates based on their potential, not external distractions. Dr. Kapoor smiled warmly. Your interview panel is eager to discuss your research on glucose monitoring applications, not yesterday's viral videos. Jasmine felt a wave of relief. That's exactly what I want to focus on too. While Jasmine proceeded to her interview, Demetrius was escorted to a waiting area where 3 Aurora Airlines executives had been trying to reach him since dawn. Mr. Washington, began Gregory Powell, Aurora's chief operations officer, extending his hand. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. I agreed to nothing, Demetrius corrected calmly. You simply appeared at my daughter's college interview, which speaks volumes about your crisis management priorities. The executives exchanged uncomfortable glances. "We wanted to personally express our deepest regrets," said Melissa Daniels, head of customer experience. "The treatment your daughter received absolutely violates our policies and values." "Does it?" Demetrius raised an eyebrow. "Because your internal data suggests otherwise. In the past 3 years, Aurora has received 207 formal complaints regarding medical accommodation denials. 62% involved passengers of color. Only 12 resulted in any disciplinary action or policy adjustment." The executive's surprise at his knowledge was evident. "Where did you get those figures?" asked Powell. "My legal team requested them from your compliance department at 6 a.m. It's amazing how quickly information flows when significant shareholders make inquiries." Demetrius leaned forward. "So let's dispense with the performance of concern and discuss actual solutions." Meanwhile, in the interview room, Jasmine found herself facing 3 professors who seemed far more interested in her research than her viral fame. "Your proposal for smartphone-integrated continuous glucose monitoring with predictive algorithms is fascinating," said Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a biomedical engineering professor. "Walk us through how you'd approach the machine learning component." For 90 minutes, Jasmine discussed synthetic pancreas technology, biocompatible sensors, and algorithmic approaches to predicting blood sugar fluctuations. The conversation flowed naturally into her personal experiences with diabetes management and how they informed her research interests. "Ms. Washington," said Dr. James Liu as the interview concluded, "your application was impressive before yesterday's incident. Your performance today only confirms what your academic record suggests: you belong at MIT." Though not an official acceptance, the comment sent a surge of hope through Jasmine. As she exited the interview room, she found her father engaged in intense conversation with the airline executives. "Ah, there she is," Demetrius said, his expression softening immediately. "How did it go?" "Really well, I think," Jasmine replied, eyeing the executives curiously. "Ms. Washington," Melissa Daniels stepped forward. "On behalf of Aurora Airlines, I want to express our sincere apologies for your experience yesterday." "Thank you," Jasmine replied cautiously. "We'd like to offer you lifetime premium status, unlimited first-class upgrades, and compensation for your distress." Jasmine glanced at her father, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Ms. Daniels," Jasmine began, choosing her words carefully, "I appreciate the offer, but it misses the point. Special treatment for me doesn't fix the system for everyone else with invisible disabilities. We understand, which is why we're also implementing new training protocols." "After consulting with medical professionals and disability advocates?" Jasmine asked pointedly. The executive hesitated. "Well, our internal team is developing." "That's the problem," Jasmine interrupted. "The people affected by these policies aren't involved in creating them." The conversation was interrupted by Jasmine's phone ringing, a FaceTime call from her mother. "Excuse me, I need to take this," she said, stepping away from the group. "Jasmine." Dr. Alicia Washington's face appeared on the screen, her normally composed expression replaced by urgency. "You need to get to a hospital for evaluation." "What?" "Mom, I'm fine. My numbers are stable. This isn't about your glucose levels. Prolonged hypoglycemia can cause neurological damage that isn't immediately apparent. You had readings below 55 mg per deciliter for at least 20 minutes yesterday." Jasmine hadn't considered this possibility. "But I feel okay. Symptoms can be subtle or delayed. I've arranged for you to be seen at Massachusetts General Hospital. A neurologist colleague is expecting you." Alicia's tone left no room for argument. "This isn't overreaction, Jasmine. This is standard protocol after severe hypoglycemic episodes." When Jasmine rejoined her father and explained the situation, his demeanor toward the airline executive shifted from diplomatic to cold. "My daughter requires immediate medical evaluation for potential complications from the hypoglycemic episode your employee's actions caused," he stated flatly. We'll continue this discussion after ensuring no permanent damage was done. The hospital visit added another layer to the unfolding story. News crews gathered outside Massachusetts General as word spread that Jasmine Washington was being evaluated for potential neurological damage. Medical experts appeared on news programs explaining the serious risks of untreated hypoglycemia, further highlighting the life-threatening nature of the discrimination Jasmine had faced. Fortunately, the neurological examination showed no permanent damage, but the incident prompted Massachusetts General Hospital's chief of endocrinology, Dr. Samuel Okafor, to issue a public statement. What happened to Ms. Washington represents a dangerous and all too common form of medical discrimination. Hypoglycemia is a genuine medical emergency that requires immediate intervention. Delaying treatment, as occurred in this case, can lead to seizures, loss of consciousness, or even permanent brain damage. Transportation providers must recognize that medical accommodation isn't optional, it's literally life-saving. Back at the hotel that evening, Jasmine and Demetrius watched as the story continued to evolve. Heather Wilson had released a statement through her attorney, expressing regret while carefully avoiding admission of discrimination. "I deeply regret the misunderstanding that occurred on Flight 1372. At no time did I intend to endanger Ms. Washington's health. I was attempting to follow safety protocols as trained. I apologize for any distress caused and am committed to learning from this experience." The statement prompted more backlash than support, with many pointing out the absence of accountability and the framing of discrimination as a misunderstanding. More significantly, a whistleblower had leaked internal Aurora Airlines emails revealing a pattern of complaints against Heather Wilson spanning 5 years, multiple incidents involving passengers of color having their medical needs questioned or denied. "Dad," Jasmine said quietly as they watched the coverage, "I didn't want this to destroy someone's career." "You didn't do this, Jazz," Demetrius replied. "Her own actions did. The difference is that this time, there were consequences." The whistleblower revelations prompted Aurora Airlines to announce a comprehensive review of all discrimination complaints from the past decade. The airline's stock dropped 6% by closing bell. Meanwhile, Jasmine's social media post had garnered over 300,000 shares and prompted thousands of people to share their own experiences with the hashtag #InvisibleDisabilityDiscrimination. Disability rights organizations reached out requesting her participation in awareness campaigns, and 3 members of Congress issued statements calling for strengthened enforcement of Air Carrier Access Act regulations. That night, as Jasmine prepared for bed, she received an unexpected email from Raymond Peterson, the flight attendant who had helped her. "Dear Ms. Washington, I wanted to thank you for how you've handled this situation. Rather than seeking punishment, you've focused on systemic change, which is exactly what we need. I've been documenting medical discrimination incidents at Aurora for 3 years, trying to improve our training. Your case has created the momentum needed for real change. Aurora's executive team just announced mandatory disability accommodation training for all staff, developed in partnership with disability rights organizations. Sometimes it takes a perfect storm to change entrenched systems. In this case, the combination of your eloquence, your father's influence, and the power of social media. I hope you'll consider speaking at our flight attendant training sessions when the new program launches. Your perspective would be invaluable. Wishing you well. Raymond Peterson." As Jasmine showed the email to her father, her phone rang again, this time from an unknown number. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Is this Jasmine Washington?" The voice was unfamiliar. "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is Keisha Brooks. I'm 17 and I have type 1 diabetes too. I saw what happened to you on the plane, and..." The girl's voice cracked with emotion. "You spoke up in a way I've never been brave enough to do. Yesterday, when my gym teacher tried to stop me from eating during class even though my blood sugar was dropping, I finally stood up for myself. I told him about you and showed him the video. He actually apologized." Tears welled in Jasmine's eyes. "I'm so glad you advocated for yourself. That's why I called. I wanted to thank you for showing me how to do that. After the call ended, Jasmine sat in thoughtful silence. What had begun as a humiliating incident had somehow transformed into a catalyst for change, not just for airline policies, but for individual people finding their voice. "Maybe this is bigger than us now," she said to her father. Demetrius nodded. The most powerful changes often start with one person refusing to accept injustice. The question is, what will you do with this platform you never asked for? Jasmine didn't have all the answers yet, but as she drifted to sleep, one thing became clear: this was no longer just about one flight or one incident of discrimination. It had become about transforming a system. And she was unexpectedly at the center of that transformation. 6 months later, Jasmine Washington stood before the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee of the United States House of Representatives. The marble columns and ornate ceiling of the hearing room felt imposing, but Jasmine's voice remained steady as she concluded her testimony. Medical discrimination in transportation isn't just an inconvenience, it's potentially life-threatening. For the 17-year-old diabetic girl from Detroit who doesn't have a billionaire father to intervene, the consequences could be fatal. I appear before you today not because my story is unique, but because my platform allows me to speak for those whose identical experiences go unheard and unaddressed. The committee room sat in rapt attention. C-SPAN cameras captured the moment for a nationwide audience following what had become known as the Washington Incident, now a case study in corporate crisis management, medical discrimination, and the power of social media to drive policy change. Congressman James Martinez leaned toward his microphone. "Ms. Washington, your testimony has been extraordinary. Could you elaborate on the changes you've observed in the airline industry since your experience?" Jasmine nodded. In the 6 months since the incident, Aurora Airlines has implemented comprehensive medical accommodation training developed in partnership with the American Diabetes Association and other disability advocacy organizations. All flight attendants now receive specific training on recognizing and responding to diabetic emergencies. More significantly, 22 other airlines have voluntarily adopted similar training programs. "And you've been personally involved in developing these training materials?" asked Congresswoman Patricia Dawson. "Yes, along with Raymond Peterson, the flight attendant who eventually intervened during my hypoglycemic episode. Together, we've conducted training sessions for over 3,000 airline employees." The hearing represented the culmination of a whirlwind 6 months that had transformed Jasmine from a college applicant into a national advocate for disability rights. The viral video of her experience had accumulated over 50 million views across platforms, sparking a national conversation about invisible disabilities and medical discrimination. Aurora Airlines had initially attempted damage control through traditional crisis management, offering compensation, placing Heather Wilson on leave, and issuing carefully worded apologies. But as the story gained momentum and whistleblowers came forward with similar accounts, the company shifted to a more authentic response. Under pressure from shareholders concerned about the declining stock price, Aurora's board had appointed a special committee on inclusive accommodations, which included both medical professionals and disability rights advocates. Their comprehensive audit of internal practices revealed systemic issues extending far beyond one flight attendant's actions. Heather Wilson had eventually issued a more substantive public apology, acknowledging how implicit bias had affected her judgment. Rather than being terminated, she had accepted a position as part of Aurora's new training team, sharing her experience as a cautionary example of how unconscious bias affects medical accommodation decisions. "I didn't recognize my own biases until they were painfully exposed," she admitted during a CNN interview. "I've had to confront uncomfortable truths about how I perceived certain passengers differently based on race, age, or appearance. It's humbling and painful, but necessary growth." After the congressional hearing adjourned, Jasmine exited the Capitol to find Demetrius waiting. His proud smile said everything words couldn't. "How does it feel to help change federal transportation regulations before you're even old enough to vote?" he asked, embracing her. "Surreal," Jasmine admitted. "When I applied to MIT, I never imagined testifying before Congress would be part of my gap year experience." The decision to defer her MIT admission had been difficult but ultimately right for Jasmine. After being accepted with a full scholarship, an outcome her viral fame hadn't hurt, she'd chosen to take a gap year focused on advocacy work through the newly established Washington Foundation for Medical Equity. Funded by Demetrius with a $50 million initial endowment, the foundation focused on addressing racial and socioeconomic disparities in medical accommodation across transportation, education, and workplace settings. In 6 months, they had already provided legal support for 37 discrimination cases and developed educational materials distributed to schools nationwide. "Your mother landed in D.C. an hour ago," Demetrius said as they walked toward their waiting car. "She's meeting us at the restaurant." Dr. Alicia Washington had become an integral part of the foundation's work, leveraging her medical expertise and connections to build credibility within healthcare systems. The family had transformed a traumatic incident into a coordinated campaign for systemic change. "Have you seen Raymond's message?" Jasmine asked, showing her father her phone. Raymond Peterson had been promoted to Director of Accessibility Training at Aurora Airlines, overseeing the implementation of new protocols across the company. His message contained a photo of flight attendants participating in a simulation exercise wearing continuous glucose monitors to better understand the diabetic experience. "Good news," Demetrius nodded. "Real change happens when systems are redesigned, not just when individuals are punished." The Washington family's advocacy had extended beyond air travel. Demetrius had established a tech startup incubator specifically focused on supporting entrepreneurs of color developing assistive technology for chronic conditions. Neuratech had redirected significant research funding toward neural interface applications for diabetes management. At the restaurant, they found Dr. Alicia Washington waiting with another guest, Keisha Brooks, the young diabetic girl who had called Jasmine 6 months earlier. Now a freshman at Howard University on a Washington Foundation scholarship, Keisha had become the foundation's first student ambassador. "Your testimony was amazing," Keisha gushed, hugging Jasmine. "You didn't even look nervous." "Trust me, I was terrified," Jasmine admitted. "But having you in the audience helped." Their conversation was briefly interrupted as patrons and restaurant staff recognized the Washington family, whose faces had become familiar through countless news programs and magazine features. Jasmine had grown accustomed to the public attention, though she still found it surreal to see her face on the cover of Time magazine under the headline, "The Face of a Movement: How One Incident Sparked National Change." "Have you decided when you'll start at MIT?" Keisha asked as they settled into their meal. "January term," Jasmine confirmed. "I'll maintain my role with the foundation, but I'm ready to focus on my education again." "The biomedical engineering program won't know what hit them," Demetrius smiled. "I've modified my research focus," Jasmine explained. "Instead of just improving glucose monitoring technology, I want to develop affordable solutions specifically designed for underserved communities. The best technology is worthless if only privileged patients can access it." As they discussed future plans, Jasmine's phone buzzed with a notification from her airline app. She was flying to Chicago the following day for a speaking engagement, and the app prompted her to confirm her medical accommodation requests, a new feature implemented across all major airlines following her advocacy. The simple digital prompt represented tangible progress. Before the Washington incident, passengers with medical conditions had to navigate inconsistent accommodation processes that varied by airline and often depended on individual employees' discretion. Now, standardized protocols and digital systems ensured consistent application. After dinner, as they walked back to their hotel, Jasmine spotted a young black girl, perhaps 12 years old, wearing an insulin pump on her hip. The girl's mother nudged her, whispering something while glancing toward Jasmine. The girl approached hesitantly. "Are you Jasmine Washington?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Jasmine smiled warmly. "I am. I have type 1 too," the girl said, pointing to her pump. "My mom says you made it easier for kids like me." "What's your name?" Jasmine asked, kneeling to eye level. "Amara." "Well, Amara, you know what I've learned? Sometimes the hardest things we face become our greatest opportunities to help others. Your diabetes might seem like a burden now, but someday it might be the very thing that helps you change the world. As they parted ways, Demetrius squeezed his daughter's shoulder. "You've come full circle," he observed. "From the girl who needed advocacy to the advocate others look up to." Later that night, in her hotel room, Jasmine reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 6 months. The incident that had begun with humiliation and fear had catalyzed changes far beyond what she could have imagined. Airlines had reformed policies. Federal regulations had been strengthened. A national conversation about invisible disabilities had taken root. On her nightstand sat her MIT acceptance letter alongside a journal where she documented every step of her advocacy journey. Tomorrow, she would board another flight, her first with Aurora Airlines since the incident, to speak at a medical conference in Chicago. Her phone buzzed with a text from Raymond Peterson, "Just confirming I'll be on your flight tomorrow. The new crew has been briefed on your medical needs. Safe travels." The next morning, Jasmine and her father arrived at Reagan National Airport. The difference in her airport experience was immediately apparent. The TSA pre-check lane now featured designated medical accommodation screening, a direct result of her congressional testimony. The agent checking her documentation was courteous and knowledgeable about diabetes supplies. "Ms. Washington, we have a note in your reservation about your medical condition," the gate agent said as they approached. "Would you like to pre-board to get settled with any necessary supplies?" "Thank you, but I'll board with my assigned group," Jasmine replied. She no longer needed special treatment, the system itself had become more accommodating for everyone. As she boarded the plane, she was greeted by a flight attendant named Marcus Johnson. "Ms. Washington, welcome aboard. We've noted your medical needs in our system. If you need anything during the flight, please don't hesitate to ask." The simple interaction, professional, respectful, without special treatment, represented everything Jasmine had fought for. Not preferential accommodation because of who her father was, but standard protocols applied equally to all passengers with medical needs. Raymond Peterson appeared from the galley. "Jasmine, good to see you," he said warmly. "Your seat has been marked in our system for diabetes accommodation. The crew is aware you might need to eat or check your glucose at any time, including during takeoff and landing." "Thanks, Raymond. It's amazing to see these changes implemented system-wide. That's the difference between individual action and policy reform," Raymond said. "Before, accommodation depended on which crew member you encountered. Now, it's standardized protocol regardless of who's working." As Jasmine settled into her seat, she realized the nervous tension she'd carried before every flight since her diagnosis was noticeably absent. For the first time, she felt secure that her medical needs would be respected without question or conflict. Demetrius observed the change in his daughter. "You seem more relaxed about flying now." "Because I don't have to worry anymore," Jasmine explained. "The system works now, not just for me, but for everyone." As the plane ascended into clear blue skies, Jasmine thought about her upcoming freshman year at MIT. She had already connected with other diabetic students to form a campus advocacy group focused on accommodation in academic settings. Her project proposal for developing affordable glucose monitoring technology for underserved communities had received preliminary approval from the bioengineering department. The Washington incident, as it was now known in case studies and medical training programs, had transformed from a personal trauma into a catalyst for systemic change. Jasmine had discovered that true change required both aspects, the privilege-backed power that her father represented and the grassroots advocacy she had come to embody. During the flight, Jasmine's continuous glucose monitor alerted her to a slight drop in blood sugar. Without hesitation or anxiety, she removed a snack from her bag. No flight attendant questioned her. No passengers stared. The simple act of managing her medical condition without confrontation represented the culmination of 6 months of advocacy. When the plane landed in Chicago, a young girl approached Jasmine at the gate. She couldn't have been more than 11, with similar insulin pump equipment visible on her hip. "My mom told me who you are," the girl said shyly. "I have type 1 too. I was scared about flying for our vacation next month. Are you still scared? Jasmine asked gently. The girl shook her head. Not anymore. My mom showed me the new rules. The airlines have to let me eat if my sugar gets low now. That's right, Jasmine confirmed. And it's not just because they have to, it's because they understand why it's important. As the girl returned to her waiting family, Demetrius wrapped an arm around his daughter's shoulders. That right there, that's the real victory. Not the policy changes or the congressional testimony, but that little girl feeling safe to travel with her medical condition. It's a start, Jasmine agreed. But there's still so much work to do. Medical discrimination doesn't just happen on planes. It happens in schools, workplaces, restaurants, anywhere people with invisible disabilities have to justify their needs. And you'll keep fighting those battles too, Demetrius said confidently. One system at a time. That evening, at her hotel in Chicago, Jasmine prepared her notes for tomorrow's speech at the American Diabetes Association conference. Her presentation, titled From Individual Advocacy to Systemic Change, would share lessons from her experience that could be applied to other contexts where medical discrimination persisted. As she worked, her phone lit up with a news alert. Aurora Airlines announces new Disability Inclusion Officer position, Raymond Peterson appointed to Executive Leadership Team. Jasmine smiled at the notification. Another small victory in the ongoing work of transformation. She turned back to her speech, adding a new conclusion. The most important lesson I've learned is that change happens at the intersection of privilege and advocacy. Those with privilege must use their power to create space for those without it. Those with lived experience must share their stories to educate those with power. Neither approach alone is sufficient. Together, they're unstoppable. She closed her laptop, satisfied with the message. Tomorrow she would share her story once more, not as a victim seeking justice, but as an advocate with a vision for a more equitable future, a future where no one would have to become a hashtag to receive basic medical accommodation. As Jasmine prepared for bed, she checked her continuous glucose monitor one last time, steady at 110 milligrams per deciliter. Perfect. She no longer feared what would happen if her levels dropped on a plane or in a public space. The systems had changed. The world, in this small but significant way, had become safer for her and countless others. In that moment, the trauma of the Washington incident finally transformed completely into purpose. The discrimination she had faced wasn't just an injustice to be overcome, it was the catalyst for her life's work. At 17, Jasmine Washington had already changed an industry. At MIT and beyond, she would continue to transform systems, one by one, until the world became a place where everyone's medical needs were respected, regardless of race, wealth, or status. What moment in this story resonated with you most? Was it Jasmine's confrontation on the plane, her father's intervention, or the lasting change they created together? Comment below with your thoughts. And if you believe in standing up against discrimination of any kind, please like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Thank you for joining us for another powerful true story, and remember, sometimes our greatest challenges become our most meaningful purpose. See you in our next video. The story of Jasmine Washington teaches us that true change happens at the intersection of privilege and advocacy. When discrimination occurs, having power can provide immediate relief, but lasting transformation requires systemic reform. Jasmine's experience reveals how medical discrimination disproportionately impacts people of color, creating dangerous situations that extend beyond mere inconvenience. Her journey demonstrates that advocacy isn't just about personal vindication, but about creating safer spaces for everyone. We learn that invisible disabilities often face double discrimination, first for the condition itself, and second for the race of the person experiencing it. The power of social media to amplify marginalized voices emerges as a crucial tool for modern advocacy. Most importantly, this story shows us that accountability doesn't have to be punitive, it can be transformative when focused on education and policy reform rather than blame. Jasmine's transition from victim to advocate reminds us that our most painful experiences often become our most powerful platforms for change. The Washington family's approach demonstrates that privilege carries responsibility, not just to protect oneself, but to dismantle barriers for those without similar advantages. What moments in this story resonated most with you? Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination based on medical needs or race? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe everyone deserves equal access to medical accommodation regardless of race or status, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of courage and transformation. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the reality of living with an invisible disability, or anyone working in healthcare, transportation, or customer service industries. Together, we can create systems that work for everyone, not just those with privilege or power. Thank you for watching. Remember, your voice matters in creating a more just and compassionate world.